Chapter 10. A few weeks after collecting the full payment from Jean Claude, Delilah and I took off for London on the first leg of our journey to the east. She planned to take the summer off traveling, returning to school in the fall. For myself, as being that I am a witness only as though between a great unknown out there and a measly meager thinking of me in here. Page 166. There is now no time to return, or even turn away from it myself. Once in the air, crossing the ocean for the first time in memory, I felt all my assumed past history falling, fading away, leaving me now not even a wet spot on the road below. Any memory of projecting now not me as anybody, but only that invisible, it, why, everybody, invisible it, why unseen, seeing it, witnessing from that point of you or I, merely appearing it now, only to be mirrored appearing as being thought, information, consciousness, not to be conned by our own wish to live, with intending only knowing out of it, a denial of it in space-time as a while now. Just us, deceived by a long time history of wishing for it looming large, as that London man Shakespeare said, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing but one limitless, unborn, indivisible formlessness now to be, baby, a by as cosmic memory, intelligence, consciousness of it that I am first, as then now, forever out in reality, a person infinite, undecaying, immortal, immortality, why? Once my boots left the ground of a North American continent, I felt a heavy coat of arms with a head on legs slip off my metaphoric shoulders. It seemed as if an unseen hand wiped my memory clean, at least a while now, sipping a cold drink so casually suspended above roiling shark-infested waves below boots, humming along at jet speed, glancing over at Delilah, her silky black hair falling forward with the head bent over a book. My thoughts turned to the enlightenment that a spiritual or intellectual light shining could justify a bringing of such a dark, murderous mayhem of people slaughtering people, living on the same planet, breathing the same air, circulating the same red blood, unaware for centuries of their other half, blew up a storm into my life, lived furiously, just to realize it, to find myself so torn apart by sheer contradiction of enlightenment for the sake of murder. I had now no choice but to let it all fall away with a laugh. All my preconceptions of a journey to the east, to India to find enlightenment, now tempered by finding out of it instead that paradox of a rationally spiritual ego justifying the worst as now the best of intentions. Recalling J.B. Stone saying how we all serve that same cause of liberation, I now found it might turn out to be, at least for a while, as much a cause for slavery. As a child prodigy, unfettered by awareness of that prodigious history of genocidal racist slaughter of innocents, it seems so straightforward to say that if you think you kill or are killed, you now know not the truth. That whole nations could or would use that enlightened awareness to justify or acquit themselves of wrongdoing on such a massive genocidal scale was inconceivable then through the eyes of a child. So, what about it now? Enlightened by me finding out of it such potential for immorality without, all while within realizing immortality. Asking myself hard questions at this stage of my journey threatened to make me want to go back home, to lose myself in obscurity of a small town life, live narrowly with a nose kept on a grindstone, of wishing to live with intent, intentionally ignoring any possible enlightenment of it. But now, even then, I had swam past the point of no return, yet aware that in days of yore, even the gods had doubts about it, doubts about the validity of enlightenment, of itself now to be better or worse or not even possible, as the case may be, of a singularity, a singular it. Why? Why then is now only who knows that the thing of it is only potentially anybody or nobody, as it is itself yet everybody, like it or not. After all, our only sun shines every time out on y'all, on in everybody, for the better or worst of humanity, still in the beginning as endings out of merely appearing it as being potential, only potentially appearing out in everybody, a wave, alright, body, indivisible, invisible, it why of a singular, it why, a singularity, clothed or now naked. Hey, stranger, something tells me Willie done gone drifting away again, Delilah piped in, glancing over as she closed her book. She had taken to calling me stranger when, after my initial experience meeting my Mahacharya, I'd waxed on about how estranged from our own self we looked on nearly all the time others as strangers, apart, playing different parts, in different places, languages, genders, attitudes, ages. Meeting the great teacher burst my bubble of estrangement, if only for a while now. An estrangement caused only by that primal wish to live with intention to separate that indivisible, individual, blissful love that I am as everybody and anybody, by now knowing out of it hate, hating to be as nobody. Looking back at her now, captivated in the light of intelligence streaming from those green eyes, I found myself not lost so much as momentarily struck dumb. Ah, okay, I got your tongue, my philosophic man, she asked with a mischievous grin. Letting the silence offset my thoughts, I bathed in her glow. She embodied somehow an uncanny blend of Joe and Marianne, almost as if the gods had brought their spirits together, only to instantaneously return them to me in a single incredible woman. We're going to Paris. We're going to Paris, I replied spontaneously, enthused as it, Ile de la Side, burst through my thoughts. Coming of age in a town so recently developed that one could almost smell the warm turds from horses first riding in. Page 168. Coming from a place settled in a mere 100+ years previous, thoughts of entering a place built on 2,000s of years' history shivered my spine. Maybe we should have booked a direct flight, I offered, watching her grin widen. No, we need to approach her on the ground, slowly, from a distance. Besides, I have an old friend to look up on our way through London, she returned with a look that said friend, a.k.a. lover. Sometimes it felt like I was climbing one mountain from two completely different sides simultaneously. The intuition of it split into a twist of fate found embodied in both Marianne and Delilah. Where Marianne had followed the Zen path of no mind, Delilah was all mind, most. Entered Joe, with that hunger compacted in an ample body that she freely shared. Our sex life easily rivaled that I had found so briefly with Joe. Dell's mind, amazed with its capacity to retain the essence of so much philosophy, so many philosophers, yet fittingly they seemed to boil down to a pair of lovers, Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. Glancing down at the book in Dell's lap confirmed this, as I could see their now familiar faces on the cover. Are we another version of them? I asked, pointing to it now. There may be some parallels, she replied with a sly smile. They met as students at the university. We met as bystander protesters at the university. Guess the question then, do we share the same philosophy? I asked. From what I've gotten from the commentaries on Shankaracharya, combined with what you've said about your recent engagement with that Swamiji you met in Berkeley, the answer may still be up for grabs. As I gather so far, Vedanta is the beginning of the end to philosophy as any particular valid school of thought, and, well, I'm still thinking about all that, she said with an ironic grin. To be honest, had I not just crossed paths with Shankaracharya's commentary, most likely I would have found Vedanta a big pill to swallow. Especially coming from a little old me after a mere couple hours listening to a little brown man from India, I asked with a mock inquisitive expression. The modern, sprawling Berkeley UC campus did somehow seem incongruous with all that Purana, ancient, ancient even of old, causing one to wonder how it could be possible in this scientific age and day of discovery not to be aware for ourselves as being still of it, the very indivisible awareness consciousness of it, a being changeless still in the first place, first a person, Paraha Purushaha, a paramount, super over person, all it, why a personality of a person, all it, why a being completely complete, unchanged throughout all days, wise as experiencing centuries and millenniums of change. That's it, why. Still, we do not now find ourselves it. That who it is certainly don't jive with that Western paradigm of man evolving over thousands of years from vastly inferior caveman to our present superior modern men time, so intelligently accelerated by electronic technology. Truly a big pill to swallow, especially when not now wishing to live with intention to even try, to give it a chance when we won't even give ourselves a chance to be it, immortal, immortality, immortal it, why, or why not only who knows why we would rather die than find ourselves free. Perhaps the Western wisdom keepers have only been borrowing ideas already fully realized in the East. As a woman, it's easier for me to find that bias of Western white male prejudice, wanting to reduce anything of the ancient East as outdated now, therefore not relevant. As that sacred feminine, I truly appreciate everything, thinking of it as y'all say you do in a purely functional way, she finished with an even look. It seems we just do not now or ever wish to live with intention to be willing to really listen. We only intend to pretend. To know it all, I gave back, thinking now. Better to pretend to know it, with that not so benign arrogance typical of us white boys of Western mind, or why as being otherwise of a know-it-all, only wanting to talk without ever time to really listen to it ourselves, falling for it time and time again. Well, the thing of it is, as being you or I, does turn things around when finding yourself lost by any knowing out of it. Why? Knowing, knowing as denying it as yourself. After all, I live at a university where it is all about knowing stuff. That means I'm continually denying myself by knowing any thinking of it. In other words, you're chasing your own tail while wishing to think of it as somebody else's, to know it as somebody else's. I interjected with a laugh. She couldn't help laughing as well. Were I to play devil's advocate here, I might find some half-baked artist, some renegade who's fried his grits on too much acid, hard to be believed. I finished her sentence. Pausing, she looked back with some concern. Willie, do you think this inquiry could blow up in your face? From what you've told me about your past and the trail of bodies that seem to follow in your wake, there may be some concerned about your revival in the role of potential destroyer. Destroyer merely of ignorance, as you say, yet that ignorance is the real foundation of exploiting institutions. Page 170. At first I thought she was having me on, pulling my leg, exaggerating my self-importance, any self-importance old Willie might really have, but her expression remained dead serious. Oh, heck, it feels like it has felt all along. If there's a mission in my madness, then I really don't have any choice in the matter. Naturally, I prefer obscurity, having tasted notoriety. But there is this large, stinking monkey breath breathing down my neck that doesn't seem to be going away any time soon, I replied, feeling a sudden chill shudder my spine. A man once told me that shudder was death saying hello, but then it was that death that overshadows all living, that saved my life, saved me from a typical life, lived by denial of it, lived merely as though born, intending only to die in it. Feeling the mood getting heavy, I laughed hard out loud to break the spell. But Dell, as I'd grown fond of calling her, was now not laughing. There it was here rising up from the deep consciousness of everybody, the presence of that relentless destroyer, ever moving, mowing just us down to the ground, the perpetual opposite half of that singular coin of creation, a domination of a domino, a lord married, of course, to it, of itself, a lord that is it as being creation of itself, a creator, sustainer, destroyer, taking it all back to a blackness now to be, wishing to live for it a gain. Who, just us, who it is, why now, for whatever. Now, not to be denied for any longer than it takes reading this to realize it. Now get back to it, chasing that tail of it, not as though now not of a but of a joke on just us. You know, somehow I get the feeling there is something you're now not telling me, I said, feeling another chill going up my spine. With that, Dell gave me a long look before speaking. Remember that day you asked me to meet you at Jean-Claude's boutique? Well, while waiting, I overheard a conversation he was having with someone on the phone. He was talking about those paintings he bought from you, saying how he planned to capitalize. That was the word he used. Capitalize on your mysterious disappearance. That the paintings could be a priceless treasure trove, as done recently by that world famous prodigy gone missing and believed by many to be dead. In other words, he was going to bring you back to life while making a fortune in the process. Jean Claude's pretty cagey. If you overheard him, it's because he wanted you to figuring that you would tell me. His way of giving me a heads up, all of which tells me he's going to wait to launch his PR campaign till we're out of the country. But when he does launch, he's going to do it in a big time way to maximize his investment. Which means there will be people looking for you, Dell replied with a frown. For us, might be best if we split up after Paris. We should have that much time before things start heating up. Folks love a mystery, especially when you find out how it ends when that missing person is finally found. Alive yet. By the time I dropped out of sight 5 years ago, my profile had sufficiently faded that no one noticed or cared one way or the other, which means it's going to take a while to regenerate enough interest to sufficiently raise the value of the paintings. It may take a year or more, I offered. Having done some research into the Mahacharya that master teacher met in Berkeley, I found that he had a high enough profile in India to be listed in a who's who of swamis that number in the tens of thousands. Thankfully, I had not mentioned him to Jean Claude, or even that I'd planned to go to India specifically. But knowing my background, he could probably put two and two together. My plan, not revealed to anyone, including Dell, to lose myself permanently in the multitudes of the subcontinent, could only benefit all involved. The mystery of the missing prodigy would remain an unsolved enigma. Only my heartfelt feelings for Dell offered any potential monkey wrench, mucking up its working out the way I planned. My early career took off when, at the tender age of 3, I once drew sketches for a camera nonstop for 6 hours. That's when BJ always to me, J.B. Stone declared me out in bold type an avatar. He spread the word typecast globally, calling me a prehistoric priest reincarnated like a High Lama in Tibet. In fact, the Chinese were invading Tibet at that time, so much of the world press headlined the fate of the Dalai Lama. My star seemed to rise with his historic desperate flight from that mysterious Himalayan kingdom. Intuitively at that time I felt a kinship to Tibet, but Sanskrit words kept entering my lexicon through that overmind exerting a conscious presence till after age 3 when it began to fade black into that undifferentiated indivisible cosmic sea as being Abba, as cosmic memory intelligence consciousness microwave indivisible it why ab lack around a cosmic lack around a wave awry body, everybody, a singular it why body of it why being to wish, to perceive, to think of itself now, abba by baby, polarity, polar eye, it why ska now knowing itself as though as thought as zendings of it out to be now as though not itself but rather appearing anybody or still everybody being to wish wishing to live intending pretending a pretense of now not to be willing to realize it themselves them the memory of me or you. Page 172. If someone came to me at that time to dig into philosophical areas, I merely acceded attention black to it, to that still pervasive, undifferentiated, indivisible everybody, invisible it, why now, found out, even now, these 7+ decades hence, in silence. A psi holding body of sound, vigorous waves emanating from a being still, motionless, more changeless center-centered centrality that I am, first a person. Thus that power then came through, the not unrestricted by any thoughts of myself appearing out informaz, out information, came through me of it metaphorically inward by drawing on it. It why without inward information informed by anything, any thinking of it. It now not any thinking of it, asking of it why. Is it now or not? Not it, why? Only who? Who knows y'all knowing out of it a wishing to live intending, pretending not to be itself. Thus it is just us as we'll turn out of it into twisted of itself by polarity ascendings out in that twist of denial. DNA as X, y'all. Sexual. If only a while a deceitful duplicity, a duplication of ourself, hermit self, inward, merely appearing it now, mirrored, knowing, denying itself out in the word, as a deceit of it, a singular it, why you're you out of it, appearing, disappearing, disappearing, me or you as X, y'all, as sexual it, why sexuality, for whatever purpose, beyond the obvious. Well then, now it seems to be only who. Who knows, denies it is why it is, for whatever reason it is wishing to live now, intending, pretending, a pretense, intends to be now not willing to find out for itself that I am it, you or I, all along. It, why are you or I as out in, out in, out in a her eye up everybody, being busy, 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 chasing our own tail, just us in time to die, if only from sheer exhaustion. As X, y'all, now not as Y, only who. Who knows why, for whatever it is, y'all, along beyond the obvious as X, as sex, baby. Mostly I dwelt as well as drew in that complete Psi Holdings that year after my visual awakening beneath the 51 Chevy panel truck, yet always soaking up the sound waves, impinging my memory consciousness in supersonic waves, impressing a language heard within without audio, so I had a reasonable vocabulary as I began to speak out loud, and brother, it was a flood of quasi-scripture with pure vision, a burning, churning Brahmavidya, or knowledge of a reality, a real it. Why at 3 I was still feeling completely absorbed within itself. I all it. Why, reality, the pure magic of a child, merely appearing, staring, starring it, before falling under the spell, understanding the spelling in words, mirroring, appearing, mirrored of it. At 3 years young, we haven't yet learned to think, to perpetually conceive ourselves out in time now a while, artificially, supernaturally, supersonically, superimposed, superficially, in, of, by, for, to, etc. It still it first, a person that I am in the first place for the first time now, merely appearing itself. Find it for you yourself as being a choice of a wish to live with attention paid with intention to be willing to realize it is you all along, or not realizing it. Lose it a while of yourself as aware of awareness now to be the wave on thy body. Everybody is being that same wish to live, wishing of it now with intention of abstractness to be a gain, appearing out of it in word only, measly word, as thought felt, to perceive ourselves separated out in time a while now. Space for Mars, bipolarity, so dead, burn, positive, negative, polar, potent potential for Mars possibilities, yet a real it, or reality you or I as experiencing, learning, earning, burning of a notional, artificial, intentional pretense, pretentious identity out in a whirling world of itself. Or find yourself as being still free of it. We are it, are we now, or not? A singular it, why? A real it, why? Or you now? Not merely mirrored out in an image in our eye, imaginary, appearing, staring it now as thought, thinking of ourselves appearing visible a while, as though not invisible it, why as being itself, existing God, creator of or man, as mind, or why memory of a creation. That these things, these thinking of it, came from the mouth of a 3-year-old, made certain pronouncements more sensational. Uttered even as a teen, they would probably have gone completely unnoticed. The age thing working against me in time, running away, running out. I lost my so-called magical powers between the ages of 7 and 11, then finding myself glad for it. Still, I did continue a while to meet luminaries from around the world. Some still alive now in 1973 might remember me. Maybe I'd get lucky enough to be completely forgotten, forestalling Jean-Claude's scheme to capitalize on my past history. Maybe the whole world would turn away from wishing to live with intention of pretension, turn away from now not willing to realize itself, thus getting the whole earth horror show over and done, over itself, out in a flash of insight. Everybody, already it right now, left realizing it's merely appearing, staring itself still, motionless, more, first a person, yet in that first place, always for the first time now, already completely full, fully complete of awareness to be aware of itself, instantaneously freedom. Paris! The word burst out of me, catching Dell's attention. As she had gone back to her book, I realized, as a ruse. It seemed she wasn't reading so much as avoiding eye contact to give herself time to consider our splitting up in Paris. For a long time it was a pretty stinky place, she muttered, without looking up from the page, showing a grainy photo of a young Simone smiling at Sartre. Ile de la Cite, Lumiere? Too many rotting corpses. It wasn't till the time of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte the third in the mid-19th century that Paris began to become the modern city we see today, she offered, looking up from her book. Louis, the son of the Napoleon? Page 174. son of his younger brother, Louis Napoleon, King of Holland. They call his rule the Second Empire. It was then, led by a prefect named George Haussmann, that much of old Paris was demolished. In fact, that demolition came to be known as Paris Haussmannized, much to the horror of his detractors. Basically, he plowed straight, wide boulevards right through typical narrow, winding streets, demolishing a lot of old neighborhoods, displacing and pissing off thousands of Parisians, she said while reaching over to take my hand in hers. In a flash of insight, I saw in her that poet, philosopher, anarchist, femme fatale, fighting as hard as any man, as women are naturally more revolutionary, long-suffering greater oppression. Compared to her, I found myself a mere indulgent boheme, variously vagabond, drunk, misfit, artist, painter, or satyr, combining alternatively at any given time. Hating money or real hard work along with mediocre comforts of the bourgeoisie, I preferred to think of myself as a free spirit rather than just a bum. Dell, on the other hand, seemed much more genuinely committed, such that I imagined her manning the barricades, defying clubs and rubber bullets. Reckon my interest in is Paris of the Impressionists, Monet, Renoir, Degas, and the boys, I replied. There were some girls, too, like Berthe Meursault and Mary Cassatt. That was La Belle Époque de la Vie Lumière, the idealized Paris of art, sex, poetry, food, philosophy. But leading up to that was a grim Paris, under the siege by the Germans, followed by the massacres of the Commune. For being so renowned for its food, the fact remains throughout its medieval history, the poorest Parisians often starved. It got so bad when the Germans laid siege to Paris in 1871 that some of the poorest were reduced to digging up cadavers to make a thin gruel from their crushed bones. Then, foreshadowing events of a century later, 30,000 German soldiers marched triumphal down the Champs-Élysées after France signed a devastating treaty paying crippling war reparations. Then, no sooner than the Germans marched off with a huge chunk of French loot, came the Commune. There was a commie party way back then? I asked, feeling my complete ignorance of geopolitics. Communism, according to some propagandists, had been the original dream of the revolution of 1789 before the terror set in. But the word communism and the ideal of it associated with the creation of a classless new society didn't actually come into French vocabulary until the 1840s. Some think the commune was communist, but it was actually a collective form of urban self-government dating from the Middle Ages, she replied, probing my expression of political naivete. Actually, my first real awareness of communism came from 1968 with the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. That, when they started barricading the streets, I asked, hoping to inject some knowledge of Paris political history beyond my somewhat shallow awareness of the Impressionist painters. Dell looked back at me with a knowing smile, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. Ah, my sheltered painter. Some think the French Revolution of 1789 was the end of monarchy, but it was restored for a time in 1814 with Louis XVIII. He was the brother of the king decapitated with his queen Marie Antoinette in 1793. He died 10 years later to be succeeded by Charles X, who tried to restore monarchy to its pre-revolutionary position. That's when the barricades went up by working-class mobs calling for the death of government. Shots were fired, followed by several days of street fighting. Government troops, stymied by the hundreds of barricades blocking the narrow, winding streets, still so predominant then, couldn't put down the insurrection. So Charles X was forced into exile, but that was yet not the end of French kings. The last king, Louis Philippe, came as compromise from the House of Orleans rather than the discredited House of Bourbon, in a sensibility eerily foreshadowing today's middle-class consumer society. Louis Philippe called for enrichez-vous, make yourself rich, and leave the politics to me. One might think Dell read a lot of French history, but it came out the night before we left that she had in fact been born there. Not only that, her father, who brought her to America when she was a child, had fought in the French resistance in World War II. A graduate of the Sorbonne, he came over on a scholarship for a master's program at Harvard, after which then to be recruited by the CIA. CIA. When she told me this, it sent a shiver up my spine. Or maybe it was the way she looked at me when saying it, as if looking through me at someone beyond in the room. Her eyes took on a surreal cast, but then I tried not to read too much into it. Page 176. Once earlier, without saying anything more about him at that time, she told me that he'd passed away some years prior to our meeting. That subject of parentage had come up when she'd asked me about mine. Then I told her, quite frankly, of having no parents. You mean you don't know who they were? She asked. No, as that I am unborn, came my reply, laughing at her look of bewilderment. Honestly, on that subject, as being born, there is a need from deep inside to embrace the truth of myself as everybody, still a person, that indivisible individual, unborn, death-free, undecaying, ancient, even of old, but typically I keep this realization to myself. It can sound so pretentious, if now not ridiculous, to call myself, as zany or everybody, unborn. Typically we naturally think of ourselves, everybody, as though born. In fact, it's only possible that we can think of ourselves, everybody, as though as thought to be born. Only knowing it as that, as being anybody by pain, praying, worshiping attention with thoughts of ourselves, everybody as though born, as birth, means only then now to die after a while. Yet as it turns out and about, we may wish to live with intent to be willing to find ourselves. Everybody, even now a while, appearing time, space, to be still, first a person, immortal, immortality, as being everybody is anyway now, body still, forever, indivisible, individual, potent, potential, mass, possibilities as bodies, as being to wish to perceive, to think of it invisibly, why, or you or I have eyes, God now knowing out of it, no winging, projecting out of itself, a denial of itself, twin DNA twisting in two, appearing, mirrored out inward, merely inward, appearing it. That is it, why you or I are eyewitness, witnessing immortality now, right now, as exiting left, leaving itself a dopey dupe, duplicating only as though its thoughts of itself reflected out inward memory. Abba as cosmic cause, in effect, karmic memory intelligence, consciousness. Sometimes, though, it just comes out like a breath of fresh air. Not to be cryptic, but just to hear itself, myself speaking out loud in that voice, all too often denied. Dell's reaction, like most, was simply to act as though she had not heard me, though there was a long pause. Knowing her as I did even then, in that pause, she'd filed my words away for consideration to be dealt with at a future date. Really, it's hard even for me to imagine having this awareness of everybody indivisible out in a world of such obvious wild and tangled diversity. Sometimes I find myself losing that assumption of separation. Then, when meeting so-called strangers, returned look of rebuke when I'm giving out that natural familiarity vibe, retreating back into my metaphoric shell. Even when so-called strangers forget their separate selves, letting their masks slip for a brief moment in a flash of recognition, the artificial identity quickly snaps back into play, that mask doubling down with a frown. At that time, in my indulgent youth, succumbing to feeling sorrow of a loneliness, till chastised by that inner voice telling, "Fool, feeling alone only possible because there is now not another." I could only shrug it off. Then self-realization might seem almost a curse. Now I find myself the luckiest person on the face of the earth. Now then, I recall the phone call. Dell had been studying for an exam at the time in the era of landlines, asking me to answer its ringing. Picking up the receiver, a man's voice asked for her. While in the kitchen to give her some privacy, I distinctly overheard her say, "Mon père." But later, when asked, she told me it was an uncle, before quickly changing the conversation. Later, she showed me his Harvard master's ring, I figured as a way of reassuring me that he was, in fact, in the beyond, but then beyond exactly where I yet wonder. Her mother, on the other hand, she freely admitted, lives still in Paris. "So, we gonna see La Mère in Paris?" I asked, bringing our hands up to kiss hers. "Oui, nous allons à Rue, zita à la cour." I'll take you to her neighborhood where once upon a time the Beats, like William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, used to hang out, eating opium or smoking hashish. "Kind of like Haight-Ashbury, then would have been North Beach," I replied, catching myself confusing eras. The press started calling them beatniks as a put-down, kind of like the hip of our generation being called hippies. North Beach sounds quaint, but Paris in the early 60s was still pretty drab and dirty from the war and all the traffic. Parisians loved their cars as much as Americans. Many streets were still narrow and winding, causing a great deal of congestion and smog. A lot of buildings, even Notre Dame or the Louvre, were black with soot. City fathers had then more pressing concerns like food and housing. Was there a summer of love in Paris? You know, like a turning point in the culture, especially in the late 60s. May 68, the Paris riots. That was a moment when really culture shifted all across Europe. I told you some about the Commune in 1871 when Paris burned. Then there was the Front Populaire of 1936, not to mention the revolution itself in 1789. Page 178. But '68 was different. A rebellion of middle class students like us, sons and daughters of those privileged to profit from the post war recovery, caught many by surprise. There I can see a parallel with '67, as the Summer of Love was also one of hate, with race riots in the Midwest and East Coast. But of course, it was mostly privileged middle class white college age kids who found love in the hate I offered. Dell caught the irony in my half smile, leaning over to kiss me on the cheek. Well, in Paris, for those on the traditional left, the rioting of middle class students seemed incomprehensible. But for those still involved in the remnants of avant garde, movements like surrealists, communists, or anarchists, they saw it as unfinished business. They still identified with underground subversion as a guiding principle of our Parisian history. You have to realize just how much youth in 1960s France was bound under a heavy hand of Le Père, along with a pretty rigid social order. So, what about us? I asked, looking her way with a half turned head. When she turned to meet my sideways gaze, I turned to nod at the book, now closed, resting in her lap. Did she bring anything new to the table or only ride on his coattails? Letting the subject of us transfer to them, Simone and Sartre, I spontaneously shifted the weight of waiting to decide on our fate as a couple to that of theirs. This brought a knowing half smile to her eyes as I leaned to touch her lips with mine. Touch of lips brought the memory of our connection that day, gasped with a tear on Telegraph Avenue. The kiss lingered there for a brief second, with a salty taste of a tear sliding in. Dell turned to look away out the window. She's the other half, completing the whole picture of it. Why existentialism to begin with, she replied, still gazing out at cloud cover layered below the aircraft. Only a woman really understands that oppression that clouds any free choice in this life. Even Camus said the only real free choice in this life is whether or not to commit suicide. Her words stopped my thoughts like a bullet bursting through my brain. Gazing off into the ongoing activity of folks passing each other in the aisle, I witnessed another existential crisis over which there seemed now not a choice, answering nature's call. A call to all life continuing unabated by anybody's particular sense of gain or loss. Then again, we do have that choice now not to eat or drink, which goes, it seems, to what the man said about choosing to live or die. Existentialists believe in free choice, the problem being there is for them no rational criteria for that choice. Perhaps because we're already chosen as being now everybody of an unconscious desire to be at lack of it a gain, in order to keep the possibilities coming or going away. Suddenly, as though the clouds tore open, scattering into the infinite blue of it, I saw it for myself, everybody, clear as a bright sunny day. My initiation to be in sight beneath that moving delivery truck undercarriage seen passing overhead had left me then now not a choice to live my life merely as though born. That we must have at one point of view of you or I chosen, as it seems, to be a wish, a desire, a lack of it, all while completely full of it, in a fullness now to be knowing out of it a denial of our fullness, just us in time, in order, intending to find it out for ourselves again of it, if only a while now. that prior choice, deliberately disregarding for the sake of ignoring a paradox, appearing a while of it now as thought to be not it, must remain hidden or as a clothed singularity. Thus, it is ourselves perceived directly, periodically, throughout a third of our time alive as abstractness, as leap into abstractness again and again over a third of our life in time, while now a deceit of our own duplicity. It is neither black nor white nor any hue of man as mind or why memory. That paradox of appearing of it a while, merely appearing, staring, it is of our own wish to live, intending by our own desire for it to be as such in order of it as again to appear to be born out of it, why, to be existent, as ending out of it a while to experience it, why, as exhale, as sexual lusting for ourselves right now, as thought felt to be left out, not it, as that we do exist a while now in a childlike world, captivated in word ideas, customs, gods, and laws of a status quo given or impressed on us all as leap into abstractness, to instill intent again, to forget it ourselves as being complete, completely free of it, freely choosing, or intending to be a willing metaphoric captive in it, as if not it, if only for a while now. A choice, intention to be a while everybody, as if now not itself still a subject, that I am it, why merely thinking of objectifying it for ourselves as experiencing it, why in order to be as otherwise, yet that subject first a person that I am, as though a while now a space-time not that I am ever left without it, a status quid pro quo of intending to substitute our reality of a real it, why ourself, prior to thinking that I am otherwise than it, why now to be only as though otherwise, as thought not it. Thus our existential situation is defined, knowing out of it now as though not it, by ourselves denying any possibility of choosing a liberation or a freedom. Page 180. But by now everybody of a primary predominant conning consciousness, awareness indivisible, invisibility invisible, it why now a wish, wishing to live with intention, willing to be who else now, if not other than you or I, why to be conned as axial, as sexual, as experiencing appearing out of it in the only wave possible in memory. Thus, predominantly we are wishing to live, intending for it to appear ourself in the only way possible, merely mirrored out in word memory of it. That is the setup already right away left to fall into the inward spell of yearning for it, learning, understanding the spelling out of it. Now then, falling nearly completely under captivity and superficially relinquishing our freedom, our free choice to choose liberation, we fall further for pre-programmed enforcement of a static status of external institutions and power structures developed out in the long or short of it, purely in the words chosen by others, already completely captivated by them. Thus, because of this inward power, our self-imposed metaphoric limitation of thinking or feeling out of it ourselves only why now, as axial, as sexual, as experiencing of us just born, as just us, born to death. That free choice of immortality, of finding ourselves, everybody, immortal, is now not even considered a possibility. In other words, our situation, normal, all fucked up, of thinking and feeling of it ourselves only born to die alone, appears to be the natural order of the world. Naturally, thinking or feeling it ourselves now born, we cannot revolt right now against naturally dying as thought left out of it. Thus, man, with or without womb, is mystified into believing that our lot is assigned to us by nature, and thus that is just how it is, and now cannot but be. It, why? Yet, upon further consideration, we may find we are merely mystified by that paradox of our own wish to live only to die, our own desire, our own intention for it to be so, just us in time now, a place for it appearing, disappearing, simply disappearing. Disappearing as though as thoughts or feelings twisted into by polarity, denial of its invisible it, why now as otherwise. Suddenly, there now is here then a knowing out of it, just us, individual, indivisible, invisible it, why a singular it, why. In of itself there is here now only a virgin mass, possible, potent or impotent potential for anything, any thinking of it, why not otherwise. Thus it may appear disappearing in that blink or wink of an eye, merely appearing, staring it, as leap into one singular, now unconsciousness, all, even now sun, moon, stars, lightning flashing, ancient, even now then of old, appears instantly disappearing, as a blackness, infinite potential, full of itself, existing, again out in that eye of I, that any, a now, why, beholder, it only appears merely mirrored supernaturally, superficially, beholden, superimposed by polarity as being so positive, knowing, knowing, negating out of it as exiting itself as any thoughts to be felt, it not intending to be willing to realize it is indivisible, individual, invisible, it, why, or you, or I, all along. In that, I am finding for itself ourselves to be forever lost right now, left out of it in the first place, or found at last, first a person, yet ever itself, why, now you or I, are I with it, a witness, now to be appearing it, free of every I body, really ever right now, as being left out of it in any shape or form, idolized appearing of it as accepting a memory of it in word, that wave, our I body. Everybody right now is being left out in only knowing out of it. Why as X, y'all? A sexuality, a sexual it, why? Out in the public, hairy pubic dream of everybody seeing it while looking out for it themselves, as they intend to be willing for it to be caught, captivated, bewildered, as though between the better or worse of it, all for the sake of appearances. Appearances appearing from that point of view, appearing it, why, or you, or I, are I, merely still motionless, more appearing of it as though between or beside itself, or now not as twisted into be a tween, a twin of itself, only potent or impotent potential, as you cannot now but be indivisible, only conned by polarity potential as being so positive, negative, negating, projecting, superimposing yourself, everybody infinite possibility as anybody convinced for a while, passing time out in memory of itself as being pervasive already right now, left out in everybody invisibly. Why are you? You seen out of it a while as though now not you. Perhaps you have now not been yourself lately. It happens to the best or worst in everybody. A while now space-time hit you. Like it as it is, or now know it as it is not. Page 182. That is the status quid pro quo. Like it or substitute it a while now as liking it not. It, why it, you or I, what of it? Who, more or less, you now know it to be true, precisely somewhere between. Who knows who, as between birth or death, as y'all may only now know you, who you are for sure. Only you, baby. Simone realized in her investigation in 1949, writing Deuxième Sex, the second sex, there is for a woman now no free choice because she has been kept bewildered by the patriarchy for so long. So long from being aware she even has a choice, Dell said, blinking back another tear while turning a page of the book. That makes me wonder what the heck this free choice is really about, I asked, watching her continue to stare down at the page. It goes to attitude, what Sartre called an inauthentic attitude of bad faith, is to act as if now not free to choose, by sticking with a safe, easy default choice dictated by outward circumstance, thus to become like an object in the world. A subject being that I am, or you are it now, knowing out of it myself as thought objectified objectivity, yet of itself myself. Why, beyond the obvious sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby, I interjected, hoping to bring us back for a while, remembering to always laugh at the sheer folly of it. Why, as X hitting itself, possible only as thoughts anyway. Any wave of it, why are you now? Cannot but be you, indestructible, changeless, for better or worse, as only you. You know it to be so. Why now not go for it? Unless, of course, you cannot trust yourself to find it out for yourself. Or you do not want to find it out for yourself. Only by making the difficult choices do we realize our full potential as subjective human beings, Dell offered. According to Sartre's as exposition on existentialism, and I, now not to be ironic, from a woman's point of view, concur. It is infinite infinity after all is said and done, which is of course, irony in itself. And please, may you say so, by all means you demand. Give me an example of what you're talking about, I asked. First of all would be what Sartre called the sub-man. That would be most practically all of us anonymous fools, unrecognized or incognito. Anyone who through boredom or laziness, or merely wishing to ignore it as themselves, there you go, as themselves restrains the original spontaneous movement of itself, suppressed or repressed in denial of their freedom of choice. Of itself, why? Then why not? As such as it is itself, anybody in denial or rejection of it being them is denied freedom by their own baloney, honey. Restraint of it, why? That wishing now to be not free of choice. The sub-man falls prey to the serious man who feels he must found his freedom in an objective external standard. As bring on the flags, of course, bring on the flag standard that must be followed through hell or high water, religiously, even when leading to brutal, immoral, violent acts. Atrocities? No problem. In that serious determination, the serious man recruits the submass man who has already readily relinquished his free choice. Thus, the serious man is ultimate example of bad faith now, not embracing freedom, rather seeking to willfully lose it in, too often then, themselves as an external idol. Idolize itself as themselves. Why? Obviously, typically, why now not you or me? His so serious willfulness sweeps the lazy, apathetic mass of subman into a meaning of life as expressed in oppression by external authority or tyranny. Then the cause is declared more important than anybody of those it who make it. Why, the cause up. Up theirs or ours? What would be some other examples of bad faith? Nihilism. The nihilist, a result of disappointment as a serious man, is turned back on himself as that nothingness now to be not asserted as a sense of freedom, but denial. Frustrated, they have now nothing to believe in, not even themselves. They have no loyalties, no purpose. Their only true impulse is to destroy, starting with themselves. Now that sounds all too familiar. I reckon we all have a good bit of that self-destructive in us, as denial in of itself. Then now again, why not? Naturally, of course, believing in nothing as though that is who else is there. When it is that something, that someone who we are first and foremost denied as nothing. That denial of who we are right now. Page 184. As nothing then is all there is, it seems that nothing is all we know to be us, she replied with a frown. Ironically, I felt that desire for nothing but a shot of whiskey and a cigarette. Then there's the demonic man, the passionate man, and last of all, the adventurer. With that last word, she glanced up at me before turning back to the now open book. The adventurer is interesting because he is so close to an authentic moral attitude. Disdaining values of seriousness and nihilism, the adventurer throws himself into life, choosing action for its own sake. But he cares only for his own freedom, thus embodies a selfish and potentially then again a tyrannical attitude. Perhaps an elevated self-importance of it as though it is only himself as that adventure that counts, I add. Just a tad as being over the top. The adventurer also tends to align with whoever can bestow on them pleasure, power, or glory, and is so often the case with those who do bestow such gifts. They may not have the best interests of those we know as humanity at heart. Best interests of humanity is a main concern, she finished, with a raised eyebrow pointed my way. Whoever sounds somehow now familiar, I said, thinking, of course, right away of my man Jean Claude, wondering what he's up to. But then now, not really. A long silence followed. We both knew our days together were numbered, but then we had Paris coming on the horizon, and where better to bid adieu? How's the tune go? Breaking up is so hard to do. Sensing Dell's detaching, letting go of me metaphorically, I remembered she is, after all is said and done, a philosopher, and philosophers cannot now but be, well, philosophical. Life pulses black again, black again, black again still, fully full, complete all the while now, completely in of itself, why or you or I are I merely appearing, it with it a wit, witnessing, witnessed now to be a wit, caught up for a bit, in that hard inward con, that cunning, cruel duplicity of that I am falling, hardly in or out of love, for it is but time after time, again and again, mere memory of itself mirrored out in me, or you thinking thoughts, or felt feeling of it to be now otherwise. These thoughts brought me to feel out of it, realizing now how bizarrely death finished past relationships in my life, so quickly finalized by death. My recent loves, found lost, lingered only in sheer memory, without any possibility of wanting to ever be seen having holding them again. For that was true with Marianne, with her so psychic wave baby, Jew's brown eyes to Joe's blues evaporating, disappearing like any dream when awakening. Now then, Dell's eye, a empress impressing me with her Ivre eye, sacred feminine body of Ma's memory of that possible, beginning of it less, more ascending out of it as being with arms and legs to go, to have, and to hold, to come out of it now for a while, not without its moments of sheer ecstasy or clear pain. Back with sorrow of periodic parting, but looking ahead to that last goodbye. For better or worse, come hell or high water, this world scatters our brief time together, to gather quanta as if particles of faith, dust, motes, inseparable, conned as our sweet parting, slow gazing specks, speckling pricks of light drifting out of eye of it. Why are you or I in sight? It, why yet you or I? Everybody a primary, predominant causal body of itself. Why? Potential, infinite, potent potential. Anybody. A now, why body, word free, a body as cosmic memory, intelligence, conning, consciousness, awareness of it, why now being a wish, wishing that I am to live, to be with intent to realize it, or willing, not realizing itself as being reality of a real it, why now, as exiting, right now left out of it by not realizing itself or ourself, our time now a while, then now yet that I am right now left leaving, transferring out of it, My ma's memory at attention paid off to a secondary, mean, inferior possibility. Now then, out of it, male functioning, mode L function of function operating as existentially in words mirrored in memory as thoughts or feelings felt of it ourselves out information. We become captivated, mystified, bewildered, and thus find it for ourselves lost, found in an inferior, childlike inward mode, a while a feeling out of it as ideas, etc. Ideas of it ourselves felt substituted out in that status quid pro quo, substituting itself, ourselves as thought born to an arbitrary given name, yet continuing to refer to it throughout our lifetime of ourselves directly, first of all as being a person. First, a person that I am and cannot now or forever but be still. As being still, motionless, more indivisible, individual, invisible, it, why, or you, or I, are I, with it, witness merely appearing. Then now, everybody to live with intention only to wish, to perceive, to think of it, appearing, disappearing, simply disappearing out in a word-free memory of it, itself experienced directly and periodically as sleep black into itself, a undivided consciousness only perceived as blackness now, instilling that intent, intending to be, positively negating knowing out of it a gain, as knowing it as being a gain of it only a while now, or then, as though no longer it. Page 186. Thoughts of Mary Ann brought my attention to that mind control she taught me, which caused a stirring of the transducer, along with inner visions of a dusty lab deranged with disuse, all things psychic being mere metaphoric potential. I quickly set things in order, proceeding to put on the head of the 20th century's most famous philosopher. He, living then in Paris, naturally his identity morphed into that of a visual artist. Wondering what happens to an intellectual when hands get involved, beyond wiping a butt or tapping keys of a typewriter. Who is Sartre, or a Marx after all, but an eye of I, merely observing what the mind, or why, or you, or I, identifying with it now, everybody, projects anything, any thinking of it, invisible it, why, or you, or me, out, visible it, why, information in the word world, defined, defiled by memory of it out in words. Thinking thus of ourselves, we're felt to be only existing out in a given name, yet we all still refer straight away to ourselves as in that prenomen, prior name, pronoun, that I am. Even without realizing it, I am that, first of all, a person, of itself, freestanding and divisible, invisible it, why, predominating any inward subdominant ideas or thoughts felt visible of itself, why, ourselves as existence, why, with intent to be content as eyes, nose, mouth, arms, legs, fingers, etc. Realizing that I am is it, why, a being of a virtual visual artist appearing, staring, it appears to begin with embracing that prior reality, a real it, why favors free spontaneity over captivity of an artificial intentional identity so restrained by myriad ambiguous and arbitrary mirage thoughts, thinking of a supernatural, superficial conception of itself, superimposed supernaturally, as felt covering, clothing over itself for a time ourself, of having to drag along with itself, ourself, just us in time now, this entangled, messy morass of ideas conceived, of itself as thought felt to be another self, constantly at the whim of an ever changing array of memory. The visual artist, at attention of intention, must start and stay in that as being first a person merely appearing, staring it a while now out of it, tracing the contour of a given model as X posed before or after the eye, without shifting attention to inward thoughts of itself, ourself, or the model, the hand, conditioned by years of picking up on a light touch of a crayon to paper, merely follows the eye appearing, staring it, tracing the contours of it a while now as the model. In that purely visual mode right now, a brain free of appearing itself as being left out ahead of itself, torso with appendages, offers a free way of activity without pondering as ponderous inward thinking of itself, any bad boy body, in motion memory, a free hand following eye of that I am now a drawer, drawing on it, of it by itself, etc., more than enough to satisfy any longing for it. Why now, as X hitting itself, only to be right now left out of it as though otherwise. Then, who is Sartre now in 73? No longer that lean, mean, hungry, young, yearning student of those trailblazers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, burning with that impetuosity of youth. Then war, occupation by Nazi zealots of authority, imprisonment for a year, testing, tempering the whole construct of existential free choice. Now, decades later, well fed, free to travel, exposed to the verisimilitudes of existential communist ideals, organized, politicized, weaponized. How does that, forged out of youthful idealism, hold up when the author himself suffers the fickle fate of age, taut muscles growing flabby, lean to fat, nerve synapse weak, misfiring, a sputter now, not a spark? Sartre, avowed atheist perhaps, finding himself brought to his knees on those occasions when the whole world seems to turn against you. Sometimes a God can come in handy. Some idea of a higher or lower perpetual pervasive intelligence of itself existing God, or man is minding wire, you or I with greater foresight might offer some solace in those times, feeling the stark loneliness of a life lived longer perhaps than once imagined, as a life of existing purely existential, considered abandoned from its source. Why, bored out from its core reality, its centrality, might realizing that I am first a person free of existing, then now might that appeal in any existential crisis? Perhaps such a popular public personage as Sartre, at least in those desperate war years, needs a constant upgraded revised version of themselves without seeming to sell out earlier ideals. At least that is what I'm imagining of it, wearing the great man's head, feeling the sheer weight of words informing any philosopher's thinking, thinking, almost as if his hard fought for thought ideas of free choice are already negated pulled down by that sheer weight of thinking of it for yourself as being anybody merely as existing, without fully realizing why of it. Why? Why are you or I appearing staring it in the first place? First of all, a person, a witness whole, indivisible, free at all times from any inward metaphoric informing of it, transferring out of it, already complete, completely full in of itself as anybody only wishing for a while, intending to be captive, captivated, hungry, hungry to lust after an ephemeral, orgiastic, ecstatic fulfillment, coming from connecting somehow, somewhere, with someone else, someone other to be felt, touched, held, searched for, penetrated with an ardor, a candor, an exhilaration of existing by that desire, that fire, that lust of it, for it why now as sexual, as sexual. Page 188. Hanging my head, I feel his. Sarts fall away with asking him why. Why the paradox of all that thought, only futilely to try, as existentially to think objectively of ourselves itself, that subject, who is any thinking of it, why it cannot but be now yet only itself. Itself, ourself, negated as thought objectively to be a denial of itself. No, winging out of itself, ourself to be as an object, appearing visible, then only by thoughts felt. Why as being metaphorically not, now felt out of it? Why or who that subject is of ourself, which may never actually become an object of thought without negating ourself itself as that subject to begin with, as endings out of it projecting itself right now left out as though projects, popular people projects, projections of thought to be not itself. A why now as thought to be otherwise as X, at least for a while, knowing it all for the sake of experiencing, sticking our finger in the fan, proving painfully that it was, after all is said and done, just us in time of our prior free choice of intentional disregard as being it. Thus it is suffering only to suffer because we do not make that hard choice to find it out for ourselves right now, thus becoming left out of it as if an object of misery, miserable out in the word world. Thus that prior causal choice, wishing, intending to be willing only to now deny it for ourselves without realizing who it is just us in time. That is the proverbial monkey wrench in Sartre's project as existential. That free choice already made with intention, intentionally projecting it out in that prior pseudo-dominant intent to now only know it. Why? Why choosing to deny it for ourselves without ever seeking or intending to find out of it? Why? Overrides any real possibilities of so-called free choice as such that I am being as thought already captivated in word. Why it is who it is, ignored intentionally, disregarded by itself as being you or I, only intending for it to be so, all along prior to any potential as existential existence of it ourselves. As Sartre is now, already as thoughts of it, why a captive, captivated by his own predetermined free choice, intending to be only as thought felt appearing out in memory of a rigorous knowing out of it. Why, the more rigorously or vigorously I'll chase that long, tall tail of chasing tail, the faster it goes away, seeming to stay as existentially just out of reach of it. In other words, we intend to fail in that pursuit in order to chase it, so as to keep reaching out, desperately desiring to touch again and again and again of it, still intending to fail, deliberately missing out of it, finding it out for ourselves, in order to chase after it again, only to lose, as we must, by that on and on going, deliberate intention to be willing now not to find it out for ourselves, that it is just us in time, full of it, fully intending, so full of ourselves, to be chasing, chasing, chasing it all over again. Again of its sort, as if he is empty. Nothing, no thinking now then thinking, only as thought full of thinking, of it only thinking of himself, now as though as thought still empty, void of it. That's it, intending to be a void ourselves, right now left out of it, Y as exiting, paradoxically, leaving, departing, of parts, playing parts out in itself, one as though two, twisting that life around again, of it as Y as existing, existentially. Now it seems abandoned from itself, even yet as again, still it not lacking it out in any way of itself, being of it first a person indivisible, a singular why thus never lacking of itself, never actually a gain of itself. As such is the unnatural or supernatural duplicity, a deceit of it, as a death in a life only as though as thought born out of it. It's a paradox of anybody to wish to live only intending to be born in order to die, for it can only find itself then now as though between itself, between life and death, in order to know out of it now as being either it or not it, as between, a being of itself as though, as thought, a tween, twisting into, only appearing, potentially appearing now, to then after a while disappearing, simply finding itself, just us lost in time ourselves, disappearing from itself, yet a singular it, why, or you, or I, merely appearing, staring it all along. Why, y'all gotta laugh ass off, finding it to be so frickin' funny, free even as seeming being out of it now, captivated by wishing to live only intending, pretending as though being not it. That I am always it, why now, as existing between itself or myself as being later, now as later, happy or sad, empty or full, living or dying, in order for it to know as to experience out of itself as being either it or not it. Now then, only as though between a gain or loss of it, why is Sartre so concerned with only supposed actual varying quality of awareness, when awareness now to be merely a being still in the first place, a, where thinking, projecting, knowing out of it, denying it for ourselves, why as being, beaming, beaming as if people, felt thinking of it things as objects, objectifying itself only metaphorically as thoughts felt to be objects, object wow, still of itself a subject, a being in the first place, first a person, a subject without any possible objective, varying degrees of it even as thought, to be a while intending, pretending to be deceived, likely as not itself so. Why? Now only thought, felt to be as exiting itself. Why worry about it as existentially? Not it. Why? Well, it seems for obvious reasons as sex, as sexuality, as sexual it. Why? Also, only as though between a gain or loss of it. Why? Is Sartre then now only concerned with study of phenomenon, phenomenal objectivity of awareness, yet to be still a aware observer, subjective it, why merely appearing, staring it, is as it only appears in fact, occurring of itself as thought to be reflected, mirrored inward memory mind, or itself. Why are you now as thought not itself as a noumenon? The object still itself a subject of ourself, merely appearing, staring, invisibility. It is to be distinguished from the object as it appears out of it now in visibility as though not itself. Why? Why is it only a while now knowing out of it a deceit as sex, as sexitine, left out wishing with intention of itself to be deceived by that cunning, cruel kind of consciousness of itself, aware of it now, not. Why? Perhaps because Sartre fully intends to picture himself only lonely, kind as being conscious of consciousness now to be as though between flickering, moment to moment, or still to be still, motionless more in of itself, himself, simply who he is, that changeless observer in of itself, only to know out of itself any thinking of itself. Why, as otherwise, for the sake of it ourselves, as expert I in seeing itself as existentially, then now, what is valuable? Is freedom worthwhile? Sartre, a traditional Cartesian philosopher, in that mathematical analysis, or learning to separate separation, separating of itself from himself now, only worthwhile as a duplicity, a deceit as thoughts, yet indivisible from a consciousness of it, to be as if that first a person, that I am is as if it is not. Now the central point of view of you or I, of I merely appearing staring it, Sartre's Cartesian learned insistence of the supremacy of cogito, of that I think, ergo sum, therefore I am, denies or now only knows out of it a split second or two twisted between lacking it or a gain of it without realizing it ourselves as being primarily paramount or supreme first, a person. A person complete, completely full, unborn, undecaying, infinitely pervasive, ancient, even of old. Alternatively, as alternative, we all a wheel may turn to be aware, where being still in the first place, first of all, a person of it ourselves as if now not transparent invisibility, but as seen looking through the eyes of another, an alternative, not to be judged as existential or not. The word, a word, any word now, consciousness to be as though as thought, not constantly out in a state of transparency, of free self awareness, rather wishing to live with intending, pretending to find it for ourselves found lost, bewildered by that our own intention, attention to be as being consciousness, conscious to be it, why or you or I thinking of it ourselves now, still motionless, more that subject only as thought objectified, as though not still yet a subject in the first place, primarily first a person free of any possible appearing out of it. Thus, we intend for it ourselves to only now know out of it, why as otherwise, as X, y'all, sexual, as sexy beast, baby. Sartre then goes on and on to say, well, in words slightly modified coming through that transducer in my psychic labs, Willie, we are now able to know or deny it ourselves more or less precisely. Why? Why, for whatever reason, do we now intend only to know or deny it as being of itself, ourselves, conned as being consciousness now to be anything, any thinking felt to be objectively out of it, still subjectively it? Is it why for just us valuing captivity only lonely knowing out of it ourselves in objectivity, or freedom? Freedom finding value for realizing it as it is in of itself, ourselves, a singular, indivisible, individual subject that I am, immutable. It seems we wish to live intending only to learn to value it, only to now know or deny it for ourselves, found lost in time. At least value wishing to live with intention to be willing to realize its freedom of immutability as just us first a person, all it why now a personality, only as though thought felt to be not itself, why as X, y'all, sexual, that sexy beast, baby. Thus, intending freedom is to be valued now, not to be identified artificially or superficially, superimposed, masked over any actual or real quality or state status of affairs. If it is a contingency dependent on chance of a being now not it knowing out of itself that value, then that value is non-natural or supernaturally, superficially superimposed over itself now, knowing, understanding it a spell, while, as thoughts felt to be it, why not? What may seem to be harder to understand is Sartre then now identifying value, that stable, live for complete totality, to be valued only in word, as sword, cleaving itself, becomes as if nostalgic. Nostalgia longing for that yet in word, as thoughts, dividing it makes it seem as if it never was, is, or ever will be complete. Ablackness now, to be a gain of it again, as by being itself ourselves conned out in word consciousness again of it. Why? Only as though as thought destabilizes or disrupts true identity, even if only a wily while now. The supreme as value of it worthwhile is existing, towards which consciousness by its very nature is now constantly knowing out of itself a denial as a singularity, a singular it into twisting twin DNA of the absolute being of itself, first a person, supreme as primary permanent identity. The sense of this I appearing, staring, it appears or looks to be that, to value something, some thinking of it, is to seek through mere thoughts felt to be of it, to achieve a certain stabilizing, if only a while now, of one's own artificial being. No absorption in contingent objective things, thinking objectively, appearing out in a visible it, why of a subjective thinking thoughts of which can offer that reality of a real it. Now, cannot be found in that shifting inward reflective consciousness, only reflecting, deflecting it. That which is sought, valued, is the firmness, the permanence in the midst of impermanence. Only thinking felt to be of anything like objective being a wily while, is deceived out in a duplicity, as though as thoughts combine only now knowing out of a denial of it, as being indivisible, individual, invisibility, invisible it. Why, transparent consciousness, être en soi, être pour soi, as Sartre says of it, as being in it, for it, a state as being complete, lucid and changeless, but patently unobtainable, without realizing it is already right now, you or I. The subjective itself, which is as thought left out, excluded by opaque absurdity of objectifying it only as matter on one side, falls short on the other of this magnetic totality which is unattainable because it is itself contradicted by that causal wish to live only with intent of it to be as existential. Why now not it? Thus, valuing only knowing out of it as being now tween one of itself, as thought felt to be a twin, twisted into two appearing of itself, appearing by that singular twist of fate, we lost to being found, finding it for ourselves as being first of all a person. A person complete totality of itself must now only lonely with intent then to be known, objectified by its own denial, as being that subject that I am. Well, will be found lost, that person lost a while to be found after a while. For Sartre, a condition of being in soi, pour soi, in it, for itself, begs the question who is in it for itself as well as why. The quest of who, why, for whatever reason being there then is that existential crisis of being anybody, determined at least for a while now to be a good faith. Why of it? Why of it, in it, for it, SX, beyond the obvious, that is a being unconditionally itself existing only a while now as a human being, so conditional, yet as a person, free unborn, still inclusive in that existential human, predetermined to be only born to die. Why, for whatever is the sense of that? In that sense is value for it to be found, or only now known lost. Making sense of it in a sense of that primary predominant seer insight seeing of value might be any appendage to make further sense of it. Why as existential. Appendage such as ears to hear, nose to smell, lips and tongue to taste or talk, or now then, last if not first of senses, beyond that who sees, fingers and toes to touch it. Why, as otherwise all being in a sense of that sensory value, that characteristic intent of now to be a gain finds itself, any or everybody, why as sex, as experiencing ablackness, as sleep into a consciousness, ablack of it, experienced directly and periodically throughout any lifetime of just us, everybody of hermit self, ourselves now instilling intent for that value to live, to be a gain of it, in it, for it, a gain of it a while now awakening it as if opening a closed eye to make a sense of it, of seeing twilight heavy as X a while now, turning out in a sense of hearing a earth life value of ears to hear bipolarity, a bipolarity so positive negative field felt feeling as thought in word a light heavy field of you or I, of first a person now a I, open a while only to close, to lose a gain of it, a I, on eyes zinging bipolarity and electromagnetic plasmatic field to be molded as a hairy pubic public dream. A while out information of memory yet word free awareness of first a person. I of I, a person, all, it why now, a personality in a sense of I, full of itself, seen of ablackness now, a value to be a gain of it. In other words, making other senses of it, why as experience, waking, quaking, baking out into twilight, or heavy heaving, having itself, ourselves, a good or bad in a sense, sensory time of it, only to return, or I turn as though as thought less more of it now, everybody, as sleep into that, a conning consciousness to be now, out, in, out, in, out, in a hurrah, in a sense of who, what person sees a unseen of itself, inciting, instilling intent, valuing, have lack a wave, alright, body, lacking only to be seen again. Pour soi, in soi, like the man John Paul said, par soi, to itself, himself, itself, de soi of itself, be still. At least for me, Willie, in other words, that is it. C'est soi, c'est moi. It is it. It is me, a memory first out in that singular sense of it opening eye to the twilight of it without value, of attribution of appendage, or another sense of hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, it still motionless, more a memory of you or I membered, merely over mind, over itself, superimposed a while now, a memory of a long, long time ago, a going to be still, coming back to black, first, a person motionless, more a eye appearing, staring, starring, starring itself as thoughts, in a word, God, creator, creating that by, baby, telling Poseidon in a word to be still, a word, A10, a 10 binary bipolarity, a feeling, felt field, a cool, warm, bluish gray light field, pervasive, pervading without the arc of that covenant, that agreement within a word, God, or go to wish to live with a free choice, a choice no matter what, to find out of it ourselves, free of it, or in the or why, theory of mem or why, freely choose to live only with intent to die. A free choice to come or go from death to death, as a gain, a loss, a gain, a loss, a gain, a loss, turning time and time again now, as a black around, splitting a second now in two, being twin of one of itself, pour soi, in soi, c'est moi, a mirroreth memory of it. Why, y'all must laugh, as all realizing it. A sense of value then is now knowing out of it a sense of lack of it, the lack of being certain of completeness, to be complete by the reflective consciousness of who concealed in us nearly completely in this word, ablack as ablackness, as experienced directly, periodically as leap into a unconsciousness. Understanding the I of that I am itself, which is why what we think ourself as itself existing only as thoughts, felt to be who we are, evaporates instantaneously, a blackness, as it were, to now no thing, nothing but you or I, or no thinking of itself, ourselves, is properly called a moral or more all being, any or everybody itself, conscious awareness of itself, ourselves, consciousness. Man is a being of whom itself existing God now as man, as mind or why memory of who, aspiring, thinking to be a God. Sartre writes, as translated through that singular why transducer, the passionate wish to live with intent of thinking man as mind or why as axial sexual opposes as awake, a with a ka now, ka knowing, deposes Christ, Krishna, Christos, that sacred, indivisible blackness, not to be valuable only with intention to be a gain, of dividing a sword of it, that man is to lose himself again as a man, as memory, in order of that a God shall be found out of itself existing, creating a creation of itself, a being in the first place of it. Why? That intention of memory is it why man naturally remembers to aspire or breathe a breath spirited away from his unsatisfying human condition, or hue of man as mind or why as exiting right now left, leaving itself existing into words, a state of consciousness now to be in completeness, to be a while as thought felt, not complete. But since the idea of a God is a contradiction to a man as mind or why of blackness desiring to be a gain of it merely in word memory, we must continue now only knowing out of a why as a being alone, as that is our intention all along, all alone. To understand this is to laugh it off for ourselves itself now, only a good knowing out of it, a bad faith of l'esprit d'Israël, as being the serious man is mine, or why if we imagine the valuable is a property of the world, pretending that our tasks are written in the sky, we are doomed to failure and despair, appearing, disappearing, simply disappearing in memory. Why, as exiting, right now, left out of itself existing, yet indivisible as any individual is. The fundamental and attractive idea of Sartre writing is freedom. Freedom ascribed to just us how we find it ourselves, despite that inward reflective captivity, under the spell, understanding any inward spelling out of itself, ourselves now, wishing to live, intending to be, willing to realize it through the mean medium of our various human activities, out in towards describing a liberated condition of pure identity realized as being first a person. First of all time now, a person unborn, ageless, undecaying, infinitely pervasive, ancient, even of old, now, then, in that I am thinking thoughts felt, shifting through the transducer, sifting Sartre's words by its singularity function, of functioning purely for the sake of liberation. A liberation from captivity at attention paid off only in memory of mono I, merely appearing itself, existing, appearing out in a wily while now, me or you or anybody. It seemed what Sartre meant by freedom was the reflective, imaginative power of the mind, or why its mobility, its negating or knowing out of it the given, its capacity to rise out of muddy, unreflective, mindless states, its tendency to return to an awareness of itself. But then as now, Sartre had fallen under that spell, assuming himself existing in a sensory thinking, felt to be turning knowing out of itself as being in a given name, For in a sense of freedom, we are now only potentially free or not so long as being conned in our time conscious of ourselves as thought felt out alone in that given name. Thus it seems what Sartre meant by value was only a notion of completeness, which then haunts the completely free consciousness, conning it out in towards of which it then now must vainly aspire. This aspiration would, of course, take the form in words of some human project, projecting a projection of itself as thoughts felt only in a sense, or senses of itself, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching it, to have, to hold, or all time now, knowing out of it. Thus, what Sartre is trying to analyze for just us as the nature of all human consciousness and human endeavor is in fact first a person purely awareness, in, out of itself now a wish to live, intending, pretending to be conned or conning out in an unconsciousness, to be as thought felt supernaturally, superficially superimposed over understanding of itself existing, freestanding, as that I am not only out in a given name, but a prior name, pronoun you or I. The reflective consciousness reflecting itself in the word as thought felt, imagining itself now, not itself, yet still itself. A good runs the danger of falling into a bad. Faith falling under the spell, understanding the spelling of itself existing in word, prolonging inertia, leading into unreflective sluggishness. From intense creative imagining to a vague, idle daydreaming, completely captivated, entangled, ensnared in denial of itself existing, yet first of all, a person, free of ever existing out in the first place. Sartre describes imagination as a spontaneité evokée. Aesthetic enjoyment of it then seems readily disconnected, as thinking thought felt to be both as being mobile, free to be captive in a consciousness and or of itself, a perilous aspiration to wish for it only with intention to be right now left out of it, in a word, valuable. The goal of art, Sartre writes in What is Literature, is to recover this world in giving to it, to be seen as it is, but as if it had its source in human freedom. The work of art depended on, as it does, on the reader or spectator, free of judgment, for recognizing its existence is an appeal, a demand. The reader, too, must be the recreator of the novel. His continuing to read it properly, that is, to enter into it sincerely, to lend it his emotions and so on, involves him in a sustained act of faith in the work itself. The imagination must be enchanted, but not too enchanted. An excessive detachment or suspicious judgment will fail to recreate the work at all. An excessive self-forgetfulness will subjectively break down its objective contours to blend it with private fantasy or daydream. In the latter case, novel reading becomes a drug to distract our attention in the time it takes to read it. Our delight in a work of art is our sense of imaginative activity involved in recreating and continuing viewing it. The work of art is, in this sense, a task set to finding attention freed as purely a witnessing it from that point of view merely appearing it a while now, in word, staring at it. This move meant for aesthetic enjoyment, seeking to apprehend through the material presented to it some autonomous totality of experience in whose internally related completeness it may achieve, or at least find for ourselves itself reposed in of itself a perfect equilibrium. The movement which so clearly follows form, which Sartre attributes to all human striving, cannot now, however, afford any lasting satisfaction in order to continue as experiencing itself existentially. The real is never beautiful, Sartre wrote in L'Imaginaire, as now translated through that singularity transducer. Beauty is a value which can only apply to the imaginary, whose essential structure involves the nullification, neonization of the world. This is why it is foolish to confuse ethics with aesthetics. The values of a good presupposes a badass being in the world, being concerned with behavior, in reality of a real it, Y, as X. An objective context as X remain that subject that I am, it, Y, from start to finish, even as experiencing itself out in the absurdities of existence. Still, truly, true, that I am. Oh, that image in our eye, imaginary of a beholder of that, I am that a memory, awareness word freestanding stare eye, a being still motionless more in the first place, abba now as ka now, know it all, y'all, it, why word free, as king of it, why now, no, knowing out of it, a cosmic, karmic, comic memory intelligence, conning inward free consciousness, why it is, first for all time, a person now not ever as existing, thus, a being completely free of description, free of words like any or everybody, me or you, born to die, beautiful or ugly, or even good or bad, or greater or lesser, valuable or worthless, or more. A freestanding stare, I merely appearing it, of any image in, at, I, on. For at attention, I am now inward, stretched out and about. Out of it, why, merely mirrored in word as a mirage. As a thought felt to be right now left out information worth more or less a while or not, for it can only be worth something by someone, as to thinking of itself twisted around a gent, L man as mind or Y, a function of funny action out in memory. A memory of itself, me or you, wishing, with intention to be willing of it by polarity, a thinker, a meager, measly, miserly, thin king of a why. It, why now wishing, intending, pretending for it as thought felt to be knowing out of itself, all so positive, so proud of negating itself, our self-importance, as worthwhile at least for a time or two of just us a while now, only lonely, knowing out of itself, ourself, for the time of our lives, ourself in space-time, deceived by deceit of valuing itself by a popularity, a polarity popular ascendings out of it, in as though as thought of a people, popular people project, projected. A project is beaming a projection of itself out in a so popular positive negation, opposition, a position of it still motionless, more freestanding now, a good while of it out in a bad-ass, cunning, deceitful duplicity, being a dopey dupe fool, foolishly fooled only as though as thought felt out of it. Why only in memory as a word cleaving itself in two, twisting toward, appearing, all the while now merely appearing, staring itself, that stare eye of I that am first, a person ever free of existing. Oh my God, ever only now as being kind in the word, out of it by God, as by God consciousness awareness to be a being kind in the word, out of it by God, as by God consciousness awareness to be a while, wishing, intending, pretending to be aware, knowing only of itself. Why not? Now, all alone, lonely a second or two, why as existential, for the sake of experiencing it for ourselves for the best or worst of times. Since describing or naming it is a revelation of it, a revealing, a making out of it merely as thought felt to be it. Why, though completely in of itself complete, only now wishing with intention as thought felt to be out of it, a baby, a lackness now to be a gain of it. Why as ka now, no, to turn, burn, yearn have lack around a gain, knowing out of itself a paradox in the word contradiction, or tradition. Contradiction, or tradition, thus, still itself, everybody is now the writer or reader or anybody. A body of it now, baby. Baby, ho, bye-bye, baby. Why, merely wishing to live with intent to perceive itself, thinking of knowing, denying itself. Why? It can never actually be lacking in any way, being of itself, completely of it. Why? Page 196. Why now not? Him or her of itself. Why now not lacking even in any way, shape, or form, any so-called third person, first fully a person? A person, why being it all along complete, cannot now be a gain of itself, or for that matter, lose itself. Just who is it to be lacking a gain of it? Why, you or I merely wishing with intending, pretending for it to be so sure of itself, found lost, out of it still a neutral, formless, completely pervasive being, more now subject to observer, observing, knowing itself objectively. Observed as being a gain of it only as thought fell out of it by lacking, being objectified out in observation. Is there here perhaps someone thinking in the word of itself existing God in the very nature of his or her inward calling? Someone of itself existing God? Why? Why a good God, or goad of wishing with intent to be thinking, a thinking of it still as king of it? Why now to be called a writer? Someone calling or called out by God, of which is indicated in the word now. How, if not by an agency? Then now who exactly is not that agent if it's still a being formless, yet perpetually pervasive, aware of awareness, witnessing any writing or reading or speaking of it? Why? That's a good or God question, as that is now not all bad, or is it? Why, for God's sake? Those very same dead-burn crazy squigglies information as words slicing and dicing it may simply appear in of themselves as symbols or something thrown out to stand in place of realizing it is you as subject, as you subjecting yourself as though as thought objectified symbolically now to be not you, all because that is the way you wish to live, intending for it to be now only lonely, knowing it yourself only objectively. Why, you wishing with intent to perceive yourself by now thinking felt by polarity as sendings out of it so positively knowing, denying that you are I, merely appearing it only appearing symbolically at first, till further falling under the spell, understanding the spelling of those dang squigglies as words slicing and dicing it only metaphorically, yet indivisible, playing a part as a conned out in conning consciousness. Even Sartre thinks of it, why, for taking it to be himself as a Sartre, as though existential, captivated out in any given arbitrary name, really only thinking of itself, himself, as being captivated now by that prior wish to live only intending for knowing it to be so, as by that unrealized choice to value a blackness now, in order to be only knowing out of it again. For once that choice is made, there is here now only going to finding it for ourselves that singular it was as a black again as leap into unconsciousness. Thus it makes itself nearly impossible to find or realize now while fully conscious, awake. That is especially so given our wish intending now for it to be as such in time a while, a deceit only knowing out of itself ourselves denied as first a person. Why? Why a person all it, why previously to fully intending only lonely to be as axial, as sexual, as existential. It is only by that very inward means that there is here now then appearing out in visibility, appearing a while as a duplicity, a while now a deceitful duplicity still by in of itself indivisible, only being as intention of pretension to think thoughts felt called out of it to actually be a writer or philosopher or whatever. Now, a while that I am appearing in a given name, of it merely mirroring itself in word, that means, as awareness, I am always free to choose, in other words, now, not to only know it. Why, once identified, objectified as by itself ourselves in a given name, why time is set up to run down and out, assuming it for ourselves as born in time, I must die in time running out. That appears to be the natural course, only because we fully intend only to perceive it to be so. That is the paradox of it, seeming so absurd, but in reality, a real it, why of a singular it, why now, it is completely true to itself always now, timeless, only a while a deceit as thought felt as exiting, leaving itself, right now left out of it. Why iterating intention of a given value, desiring have lack again, have lack again, have lack again. It seems coming to go again, only to lose. Now a unconning consciousness in of itself, a being to fully intend to perceive itself, have lackness as experienced directly periodically by everybody as leap. Everybody. A supersonic wave, alright, body. Everybody as being causal, bipolarity potential ascendings out of itself for a while now in space-time, of itself ascendings, beginning with it. Why? Why naturally, supernaturally, for the sake of good times or bad? The bad inevitably good, for transferring value from now y'all knowing, denying it, to realizing it. All for the sake of liberation, finding it out for ourselves just in time to avoid Ma's calamity. Thus liberation, or freedom, is reality, the real it. Why? Why, by God? In other words, in the beginning, or beginning of it, is the Word, as sword to cleave it, as means to divide it against itself. That means captivation in of itself, or as the very inward means to now then liberate itself by finding that I am always, forever, for everybody, free, free, free. Page 198. This respect for freedom, this taking of mankind itself as being unkind, captive, absolutely only ascendings of it, or so positively now knowing no winging out of itself by polarity cannot of itself, however, forever, for everybody remain bound up or down within any bounds demanded for appreciating or valuing any work of literature. This fire, once kindled by wishing to live with intention for it to be so, will spread, eventually conned into consuming it all by itself. Appearing, disappearing, it's merely disappearing out in itself alone, a singular it. Why the good intention, as king of itself, why, will be historicized as a thin king out of it for all to readily read it, to find it out for themselves as being out in of itself alone, thus realizing why it is who it is, who any or everybody wishing with intention for it ourselves to be willing for it to be so, as king of it, why, as sendings out of it, a la Ketenke, queen of that in which it is even now not far at all from anyone with intention to be willing to find it out for themselves itself already in all right now, left out in the open as society as a whole is yet indivisible, conned into playing a part out in indivisible, conning consciousness in spite of all the apparent divisiveness. As reader, writer, or player of itself, ourselves cannot now only acting a part, be a part, actually, only as thought, feel, felt to be divided, consistently enjoying the free creative activity of the making and appreciating of literature, but forever with intention to remain content that this shall take place in a society which is in itself now only for the most part knowing out a negating of it. Why? as a rule by blind passion, prejudice, or other arbitrary confinements of the spirit. It is inevitable, finding it out for ourselves, only playing the part of the novelist, playwright, player, audience, not only to exemplify this liberating creativity of art, but, since he or she cannot, from the nature of its subject matter, avoid commenting on society, to advocate intent for any and all to be willing to find it out for ourselves as being any or everybody, as community of a singular free being. Thus we will, intending for it to be so, in fact do with more or less itself consciousness of himself, writing well aware of it for him or herself, as playing parts of itself for ourselves particularly. Her image public consumes that good intention to be willing to realize itself for ourselves in personal relationships, all while playing another part, as simply concerned for better or worse itself as ourselves, even thought, felt to be only material, objectified a lot of our time. The novelist, fully intending to be willing to teach or reach out for it both as oneself or out of itself, ourselves, as thought felt between the pure liberating pleasures of the spirit, or the protection and promotion of a certain disposition of society at large now, with good intentions, to be willing to realize it's not appearing disappearing, only simply disappearing as a lack into itself, a gain as sleep into a unconning consciousness. Thus, it is a rather breathtaking argument for itself, found out as any or everybody being, first of all, to the very last breath, a person. A person free of any information of itself at any time, night or day, still, as always, just us. As that in reality a popular novel in fiction may reveal that I for society as a whole truth, then any or everybody as being still that, first of all, a person of itself, themselves, indivisible in any individual, just as well might realize that to be true subject at any time, even while living a day-to-day objective life, as now not it. It is also easy to see why prose literature in general, and the novel in particular, reaching such a pervasive degree of mass popularity, is most suited to a commitment, an engagement at attention fixated through a well-crafted story to reveal itself for ourselves in the time it takes to read it or listen to it. A story told out in the very same words that first captivated attention to begin with, transforming that inward captivity out in word to freedom. A freedom which is made popular, turning all readers around. Page 200. Around a more specific kind of social recommendation to wish to live, intending to be willing to find themselves as such, merely appearing, staring at the page a while now. All this mental ruminating through that, a singularity transducer, brought me back to Dell, sitting quietly there beside me. Having been swept away, immersed in thought, felt so existentially alone to belie being as any mere witness at first, a person now not yet ever as existing at all, y'all. I turned to touch Dell's hair as it lay against airline fabric, floating on clouds so high above that conflagration of the dirty earth lie below, bathed in bloody oceans. I might assume now then again that non-attachment as being still forever first, primarily a person free of pain, turmoil, or death. Feeling my fingers gently stroking her hair, she turned with a soft smile. Willie boy being quiet. What you been thinking about? She asked with a pout. Oh, I reckon whether or not we need to believe to exist. Let me guess. You let Sart creep into your head, she replied with a chuckle. Well, tried his head and it activated that transducer in my mind lab that I seem to have forgotten about since an old friend passed away, I said, feeling a sudden wave of emotion coming through. Feeling it start to choke me up, I reached to pull her close to avoid eye contact. Nuzzling her hair, I caught a whiff of rosemary oil while blinking back a tear. Caught in that emotion, pressed against the soft mat of her silky tresses, I kissed her there, then felt my lips slipping down along her cheek to meet hers. That kiss lingered a while before she gently pushed me away, blinking back tears of her own. Something about Sart and Simone that gets me all gooey, she laughed, quickly brushing off any tears trying to fall. I guess it has to do with the way the war tore into their romantic interlude, with the Nazis storming into Paris, sending Sart to prison and all. Of course, now they have an open relationship, finding themselves with separate lovers. Yeah, they're just a couple old fat old fogies now, I reckon. Now, thinking back, I realize just how brash we can be in our youth. I can imagine you as a fresh 3-year-old, scoffing off those burdened by their years. Page 202. No, you can't really. I mean, yeah, I must have come off a bit raw ego, so uncompromising. So, what's the big deal, living and dying? Nah, ain't no thing, just get over yourself, I replied with an exaggerated shrug. It only takes losing one lover, or merely surviving adolescence to quickly temper such nonchalance, making me an alcoholic before out of my teens. And I could use a drink, but really need to prepare myself for India, and with Paris waiting along the way, there would be plenty temptation to fall off that rickety wagon. Taking my hand, locking her fingers with mine, Dell seemed to sense my turmoil, but turned her attention back to her book of Sart and Simone. Sart now, an old fart, I chuckled to myself, but then felt the transducer firing up in the neurons of my brain. In Sartre's popular pamphlet, L'existentialism Saison Humanise, I found his notion of harmonizing ends, a contrasting or even contradicting itself, that, as any idea of harmony between who, then, why, for whatever, weaponized as a political weapon. In this writing, Sartre gets downright dramatic or contrary with his view of the non-existence of prior value to action. Why then now, as existential, to whom is value to be attributed to or denied from? Is he talking nonsense of non-existence or nothingness, of no one prior now to be someone as existing existence, even as thought felt to be something from nothing? Someone now from no one then? Why, you are you now a while, from then, not you forever. Who, who was there, if not here now, telling me to be aware when run over by that truck? Who now then telling who? Naturally, it is in that first moment of movement for that I am finding myself indivisible from any awareness of that voice. A voice in word, heard in wired without any ears, only ears to hear. A voice telling me as itself realized, only seer, seen, unseen, you or I, of I, any or everybody, to remember, be still, that I am is first of all, a predominant, paramount, indivisible person. A person first of that or any voice, a now why of it, de soi, inward or outward, heard pervading me, a now why memory or my I as a memory of itself out in word memory of who exactly is opening out in that I of I, creating my life, saving my life, sustaining my life, mirrored memory, de soi of itself, ascendings of itself, my life, out in the or why of inward, or out of it inward, a mem or why now, knowing, God now out of it, me or you, a voice, vocalized memory as being first a person all I, personally of that I am merely appearing it why it is a singular, why inward now as thought felt, beyond itself as exiting itself existing right now, left mirrored in word into twisting abstractness now to be a gain of any appearing invisibility of it why. It's now everybody as being with that wish, with that inferior intention, only to perceive, to think of itself as exiting, leaving itself alone through knowing now, then my voice, a voice speaking through me prior to that confusion, that fusing subject-object as objective objectifying itself, consciousness now to be only known out of it in words like eyes, nose, lips, ears, etc. as myself, in mother words, Ma's words, in other words then within a year's time after 3, till age 7, when finally falling completely under the spell of thought, thinking of myself, understanding the spelling out of it, I served as a clear channel for itself realized, why as being now, for whatever, still not as thought to be otherwise. Yet then now, after a while, 3 or 4 more years, the prior cosmic memory, intelligence, cunning, consciousness, karma, exerted itself as an artificial identity of a given name, of which that I am wishing for it, intending, pretending, gladly assumed it as Willy Boy. The thing of it is, by now, thinking of knowing then I had already caught the attention of J.B. Stone, who promoted me as Avatar, This global promotion gave me a reputation that took 7 more years to play out. At that time, I began to fade into oblivion, partially due to the sudden death of Mr. Stone, as well as my moving out of the area. That reprieve, living a so called normal life as though born, is proving to be short lived as I find myself journeying to the east to lose myself in the spiritual ocean calling itself India or Bharata. A light less more of that I that am a memory of itself shining through the darkness now, to be turning, spurning, spinning, yearning at Lacaron as king of it. Why now? Knowing out of itself, ignored, out in the Maya. Maya. Power of no winging out of itself, ignoring, ignorance. That power is how, as by what means, why it is potentially possible for anybody to intend to think of it now as if it possibly nothing of now as thinking of it. Why not to beg in the first place as thoughts of it not as king of it? Why now a thin, emaciated, meager, measly, chintzy beggar? That's where Shankaracharya disputed Buddha, sending him or his followers packing off to spread their heresy of the nothingness of Buddhism to surrounding countries so reminiscent of followers of a Jewish Jesus Christ spreading theirs to Europe and parts west in order to start a new religion of no thing, non-thinking Christianity. So, Jean Paul, you see, you are sadly mistaken, ignoring it for yourself, essentially first and foremost, if not all, a predominant person, pervasive and attribute free indeed, immortal immortality, yet the sum, the total totality of everybody, everything, everywhere, as being some thing as king of it. Why found lost too often? Nothing, nothing, as a thin king of nothing, or now to beg in the first place, as to beg in a life so twisted as something someone as being to intending, pretending it to be nothing. For now, thinking of knowing it all the time now, merely mirrored a while. Page 204. Mirrored a cunning, conning, cruel duplicity of our self-deceit. For as we wish, so intend for it to be, so will turn desire, dessoir, ablack around again, ablack around again. Sartre claims there is no essence, nothing prior to itself existing, completely forgetting, ignoring it as being first a person being still to be willing, pour soi en soi now, a split second person nature from that whole point of view of you, of itself now, nature as not you are. Now you turning out into twisting as being contrary, a not, entangled of it, knowing out of it, a denatured natural man. A man is mind or why, intending for it to be willing, it lost a while now. then found lost in of itself, tempered or offset out in any given objective ideal, it seems right now left out to leave just us with our tall tail all but flapping, flirting, farting in the breeze. To say that I am creating value by my choices now, only as already existential, offers no rationale or possibility for itself existing in the first place, as if beyond that is only so called good faith, a faith in what only who knows out of it why seems to me a recipe for disaster. It is why, kind of like the way things are right now, left with so many of us finding ourselves lost to believe in knowing nothing, but only who knows what. Still, these are only words, useful to think about it, why not now? Useful, you as full of words of it, why itself, why not only who knows, as being who are you in word, as being who you are in wide, creator, creating cause, and effectively a creation out in word. God is a word, gold is a word, insight, inciting instance, hermit, freestanding insight merely appearing it now then. Who knows? Who denies itself? Why? Guess who? Who is it? Wanting, fully intending to be willing for Ma's appearing all right now left, knowing out of it any or everybody, if not you or I. Could it be only you or I inward intending for it? Why to be right now left out, knowing of itself, if not all alone in the word dark? As that good or bad book says, in the beginning, middle, end is the Word. A word with God. A word is as God is a word. God is a word. A God now forever non-denominational, as word cuts both ways for everybody believing in it or now not it. Y'all may believe in word, y'all may disbelieve in word. That choice either way bound to be made in or out of it in word alone. Whatever belief, faith, understanding, misunderstanding the word, a word, B word, etc. Throughout any complete dictionary account for something, someone, or another being by some thinking or dreaming of it potentially possible only out in word. Accepting or denying it can only be done either way, in word alone, still by who? Who, if not now and forever, a being first, a person. A person, all it. Why a personality? It, why now as exciting itself out to be seen in word as sound, vigorous waves are I. Psi hole and supersonic Bodhi as being now to fully intend to perceive, to think of just us in time now of itself. Why a person first of all, a person first of all, y'all of it. Why are you or I by now as king of it? Why only intending to beg in it as a beggar? Why not now as all causal, cosmic, memory, intelligence, cunning, consciousness, karmic, cause, effect, comedy, a badass comedy of errors, a being me or you as memory being, to only intend to be, to perceive, to think that I am a Y as exiting, right now left out of it a while for the sake of getting off on it. This means Sart, or Bart, Tart, or whoever it may be now, knowing itself inward, intends to only start, perpetuate ascendings out of itself, ourself for a time or two or more of it. Why? Twist just us. Twist a singular it, why in two of it appearing by denial of itself. DNA, a while, coded ultimately in word, a while, a deadly deceitful duplicity in words such as those that I am quoting to any reader reading this or listening to this now, thinking of themselves as being out of it in much the same way. Now, thinking in words as such that I am only knowing, denying myself as thought felt objectively all while forever that subject that I am. First, a person, as subject of any life subjectively reading or listening to this, as being denied now by itself, only knowing out of it myself in a given name for the image imagined in memory of it for myself, as that I am imagining it for myself as well as yourself, dear reader, listener, inward reading or writing or listening right now, left out of it in words. Imagining of any man with or without a womb, done gone out of it in words. That I am only as thought felt, intending to perceive, choosing to accept or deny it for myself. In thinking of it for myself as reader or writer or listener, that I am now only knowing. Knowing it. Why indeed, my man is mind, or why memory, meaning to be potentially anything. Any thinking of it in wide, full of ourselves for a time or two, twisted, abalac around only again, potentially possible in word. Okay, reader or listener, in that I am hearing you, thanking you for giving me as writer your complete attention, paid as always completely in words. That I am, first and last, a person. In other words, that I am now not speaking for myself, but as Sartre, coming through that, a singularity transducer. Page 206. Further, once it is clear to me that freedom is, should and must be the basis of all value, I cannot now but intend to be willing to find it for myself as embracing, embodying it, as being that freedom. Free, as awareness of itself to be known now or denied not in or out of any concrete manifestation of some words thought felt to be as some thinking or something or other. Why as otherwise? Be still, fully intending to desire to think ascendings out of it in words, only to realize or deny it. Why? Listening or reading them to begin with, in that I am finding it for myself still. The ultimate actions of men of good or bad faith pursue freedom such as it is, as thought to be lost or found. I cannot now take or forsake my own freedom, ascendings out of it, without also taking or mistaking the freedom of others, ascending out of it as well. Then, why the heck not? It may seem a long way off, freedom, from a valiant theory of the or why, that I am itself existing only all alone now a while in mem or why of it why. Freedom may seem to be a subject in of itself, subjected to potential captivity, by knowing out of it in words of objectional objectivity. An objective it, Why? Why? Well, obviously, because we must. Wanting, with full intention, with the objective to experience it for ourselves that way, just us as objects, objectified as thought fell out of it in time, now knowing ourselves a while, as being an objective in time now, a wilder deceitful duplicity than to be appearing out in visibility, disappearing as invisibility, simply disappearing or reappearing. Our I in the or why theory of memory of me or you as it ourselves, knowing only a mem or why of it for ourselves. Why? Why, of course, of itself existing now as though not yet, as that I am first and foremost of all a person free of it. Why, as X, as existential. Person, indivisible, invisibility. Invisible, it why now appearing a while out in visibility as existing information. A su person, Nick, Pasai, Holent, zending out vigorous waves out in the eye of the beholder. A beholder, any beholder, only beholden to itself, why is being y'all knowing out of it, fully intending, pretending to perceive, to think, to drink of itself, anybody, why as otherwise. As 212, twisting, have like around again of itself, to be appearing as X, y'all, as being sexual, for that obvious reason, to get it on and on, etc., even if only a while now, perpetuating a perpetuity still of itself as zany or everybody. As back to Ablack again, Sartre now appearing to be only deduced or reduced from his or as zany point of view or I now of a human being, consciousness to be that way. Why as a particular condition of society at large. It is the most natural, proper, or improper way to be as creatures, created as framed out in that a being thus to act now appropriately or not according to who. Who is it? Why, for whatever reason, making the rules? Who is making the rules? Sartre is now, not of course by far the first or the last, to deduce political imperatives or rules from the word-free nature of man's mind or why memory captivated inward. That it is in the beginning, middle, and end as only words as thought felt to be it must be ignored. Why? Why now as existential it is only known or denied as being still first a person all it, why or you or I not ever in reality a real it, why as existing now not ever existing in reality, only in word captivity. Imagine that, dear reader, if y'all may intend for it to be found, to be realized, as that I am you now reading this, only intending to find yourself free, freed beyond any intention for it, why to be captive as two twisting, and lack around again, why as being otherwise. Thus, Kant and Rousseau, whom Sartre here closely follows as great free thinkers, only thinking of it for themselves in captivity and given names, as thought felt Kant to be otherwise, must now then at least or mostly try to reconnect the notion of freedom as mere characteristic of accounting consciousness with the true nature of a freed society. There is, however, for certain, an obscurity, an obscure it, why, or even now a sense of lack of it, why, in order to be a gain of it, a gain of it in the way Sartre or anybody seems to move, still motionless, more from a memory description of it to a recommendation of only knowing, no winging out of it, only positively ignoring it for the sake of endlessly talking or thinking of it. As such is the intention of a status quid pro quo to substitute only knowing out of it, not realizing why, for finding out that I am first of all a person, unborn, free of existing all along, a being still in the first place, a being of an individual, indivisible, invisibility, invisible it. Why? Why? Why, because you, now always the subject, that I am that first a person who is not ever possibly objectified, as beyond the intent to appear a while for the sake of looking at it yourself in a mirror reflected as thought inward out in words like eyes, nose, lips, hair, etc., etc. There seems to be only one reason why now, as sex, to do the dirty boogie, baby, baby, raby, kid, JB. Freedom. Oh, freedom now. Captured, captive, and all knowing out of it, why, as exiting, imparting itself through a sensory sense, I am that seeming captive, captivation, captivated as being out in touch with itself. That is where the knuckle meets the bone, where it, why, seemingly, impossibly, potentially, meets itself by polarity as being so positive, negative, negating itself, aten, A10 binary, as by now our eye of view. Page 208. Our eye of view, attention, of intention, fully intending to be perceiving, perceived a thinker, thinking of it as thought, felt, attention, stretched out to the breaking point, a breaking off or separating a wave of itself, everybody from that point of view of you or I, merely appearing, staring at how, as swords, cutting it, slicing and dicing it, why between itself, as being tween, a twin of itself inward, mirrored out as thoughts of itself, anyone in word appearing out invisibility, while now not actually appearing of itself, still indivisible invisibility, merely appearing, staring at, why, wishing to live, intending to die, and praying, going along with paying attention with words for it to be so positive of now knowing it. Why now positively knowing, negating itself by a popular polarity, as sendings out of it thoughts, felt neuronic, psychoneurotically to be obsessively, compulsively out of it, per soi en soi, a hairy, pubic public dream. That is Sartre, or that thou art now, neurotic all over. How, as sword slicing and dicing it all, neuronic means as possible potentially in word of a binary, a word medium of it, why as existing in word an intentional thinker, meager, miserly, chintzy, thin king of AY. Freedom to beg in, being a beggar, thus originally defined or defiled out in word. Freedom as being now, fully intending to be captive in the characters, literally all of any human, any color or hue of man as mind or why, being aware. Where? A being in the first place, still motionless, more consciousness. Awareness now to be consciousness of itself, fully intending not to be conned or canned, laughing to itself out in words. Awareness word free of anything, any thinking of it, tending to flicker at tension stretched to the breaking point of you inward, of all inward, all now knowing or denying out of it freedom, captured as being captivated under a spell, understanding in the inward spelling, known out of it, thus, as thought felt inward, flickering why it seems to shift towards reflecting itself out in a memory merely mirrored in mind or why or you or I in word. And so beware. Be aware that so-called flickering is merely as thought felt, dancing with the rhythm of a breath. In out, in out, in out, in out, in out, in out. Remember to breathe, that is to animate a while now, that self-deceit of it, why, appearing out in a by as cosmic memory, intelligence, counting consciousness. Me or you merely mirrored out in word as a reflective state of mind or why. Why y'all guys laugh as of finding out of it why or you or I witness as individual, indivisible, invisible, it why. A being in a state of ablackness, not to be gained by a popular polarity or disengagement of it as sendings out of it. Why, for the sake of flickering as otherwise than an equilibrium, a balance standing free, equality, or you freestanding, equality, at rest, still motionless, more invisible, it why even now, a while appearing out in opposition of mem or why. Still, Sartre goes on and on, speaking of it in Lettre El Néant, being and nothing, as if it were a sort of scratch in the wholeness of indivisible consciousness, a sort of finding a fault line in this and that universe as being now not complete, fully full of itself. It is now knowing out of itself and a nothingness to be now a whole, some thinking of it as worth slicing it into twisted as thought to be not holy, as being now defiled, defined out in any thinking Pasai whole, Alaket and K, queen of that in which it is itself, ever indivisible, not for a split second is freedom of that I am, severed from itself, only as thought felt, denied now, knowing out of it myself inward captivity, in any shape or form, not now for a split second, actually captive. For now knowing or denying it in order to define or defile in word of it is freedom. Freedom seeming a potential result of any sort of spiritual discipline. That is more or less of chasing one's own tail for the sake of appearing busy. In other words, denying its already connection to one's butt is an excuse to act like some sort of proud spiritual warrior. To take a peek at one's freedom is clearly, as Sartre thinks of it in captivity, both difficult and more or less all wise sheer ignorance, freely ignoring it by its freedom to be able and fully intending to be willing to do so, even if only for a while now. Freedom, found free for any or everybody, lost over a third of our lifetime, asleep, unconsciously free yet freely denied awakening out of it, intentionally desiring its lack, as perceived as lackness in order on awakening to seem potentially possible as a gain of it. Why? Why is a thinker of it thought felt to be in captivity in order to chase after it a while now? A gain of it, why? Or you or I, a being completely complete, can only be now a result of knowing it. In other words, we be captivated freely intending to set it up for ourselves to feel time after time, lacking of it somehow now then, to be a gain of it. If that don't sound like a recipe for disaster, then it might be for a seemingly unbroken perpetuation of an existential myth, at least for as long as we intend for it to be so. Per soi en soi. Page 210. It goes to that adage, be careful what you all wish for. You might get it, or at least think that you lack it, to beg in a gain as thought felt to be a beggar always begging, as if without it. At least y'all free to try as you might. Let's face it, vis-a-vis, if it actually had to be gained, then now it would be practically in practice impossible, if not highly improbable. Yet it seems that is precisely what we intend for it, because it feels so bad that it's good to fail, always losing out of it in the end, as sending out of it to be again captive, to needing, wanting that want to recapture it. Why, if not now, to value realizing it? Why it hurts so bad it's good for valuing realizing it. Then it seems now a singular reason not to know it without realizing why. Only who really knows what it is for themselves? That who is it? Why, for what reason? To find out exactly who that I am, first of all. A person still in the first place. A person being still in the first place, that I am that individual, indivisible, invisible it. Why a reality, a real it. Why, even as X, y'all. Sexuality, a sexual it. Why, still a singular it. Why, whether intending for it to be so or now not. Feeling my gaze now, staring over her shoulder, Dell closed the book in her lap. Slowly she turned to meet my eyes with a look somewhere between longing or humor. Do we exist only because nothing else matters? I asked, with a feeling, a tight, ironic smile. Do you mean, do we exist as only sex matters? She replied. Well, there is drugs and rock and roll. Now you're being flippant. Only for the sake of levity. I'm trying to lighten up my weighty existential thinking of it. From the weight of waiting for it, waiting on death, that is the only real existential dilemma, no? I asked, thinking of Sartre's kingdom of ends, asking of it why a thin king of death is so prevalent. as that thin king of it, why life seems a death from death, as though we are born only to die, as if nothing else really matters, as if all that truly matters is a thin kingdom of ends, is dying, living to die, or dying to live. For all the excruciating struggle, the pain or suffering, the loving and losing, it seems naturally any gain of it can but only lead on to a loss of it. Then it seems life is but one long near-death experience, inevitably leading only there wherever it is. Per soi, in soi, leading just us on why to get it on is sex. With a few grins and orgasms along the way, Dell responded as she gathered her hair into a ponytail, fixing it with an elastic tie. Somehow that act, exposing the side of her face along with mentioning orgasms, brought a stirring in my loins. Feeling it, I leaned to kiss her neck. That touch of lips on her smooth flesh aroused a desire to keep going, or get up to walk away. But then where? As we were 30+ thousands of feet in the air, a flash of free falling through the clouds without a parachute crossed my mind. Free, falling into a meager, thin kingdom of ends, imagining myself as sending it right now, left, leaving that heavy body long before it met earth with a splat. Then now, where would I go from there? To here or not? So, with all this existential talk, I'm curious, from what you've told me about being a self-aware prodigy, I'm wondering just how it carries over into becoming an adult, she asked, straightening her shoulders. That is a good question, one I ask myself every day. But then I reckon the real question is, who? Who is asked king of it? Why to beg in the first place? Who is it as king of it? Why now as thought felt to be a beggar? For what purpose to beg in the first place? Only to beg in living, yet to die anyway. Dell gave me a long, quizzical look before replying. It seems existentially it can only be the one who you find yourself as existing. You know who. The one who stubs a toe, bites a tongue, slams a finger in the car door, or swallows lunch, Dell replied, raising her eyebrows. As king of it, why, beyond the obvious, that is. That's the difference in self-awareness at 3 or 23. That shift, that metamorphosis, or transformation as being, first of all, a singular person unborn now, as two we steadily fall, twisted under the spell, really, a which one craft, a one-way leap of faith, a leap now, often now ledge, a metaphoric, fictional, frictional, functional edge or line between first a person, or for a second or two being tween, a twin of that, a person of you now, in the or why or you or I. You or I. Get it? Dell let her jaw drop with that dumbfounded look I remembered from childhood, when people saw to feel the destroyer in my eyes as well as staring out of theirs, as destroyer, destroying ignorance, ignoring, knowing who we be all along. Who? Who are you now? she asked, while squinting her eyes. It's that singularity transducer retransmitting it. Why, from a memory passed in words to a present indivisible from itself, whoever ourself. You asked about me as in the past memory, which can only be transmitted now or retransmitted as thoughts of knowing out of itself, still a person. A person first and foremost. Everybody now, changeless, even as ourselves, as thought captivated, changing constantly between a past or future. A person first, only traduced, defamed as a second person of you as a parasite, as being thought felt to be out beside the point of view, or I still motionless, more merely mirrored in word as a twin being, tween, more or less. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm seeing you for the first time. As being first a person, especially sober, I added with a laugh. Dell continued staring at me till I saw her attention as though withdraw into her own memory of herself, yet that, first, as well as yet still a person. A person who you or I are, or anyone cannot now but be. A being still in the first place, changeless, immortal, immortality. That transducer cooked until thought feeling it as beads of sweat popping out on my brow. That retransmitting reminds me of just who exactly is it. You know, before, you know why, before turning into an adult, so sure as being, well, sexual. She continued, pursuing that quest of wondering who, after all is said and done, for doing it. Who really sticks their finger into a hot pie hole to feel for themselves exactly what burning actually feels like? Sometime now, as then, early in our time of a childhood, we find ourselves lost, bewildered as being under that spell, understanding spelling and words. Our identity becomes confused, inward, in words tween inner and outer. The subject that I am becomes metaphorically between a being tween, as a twin is thought felt objectified a while turning into twisting around a given name identity. Once falling under that spell, that spelling out of it now only knowing, denying, objectifying itself or ourselves as being tween, teen, or young adult, we done for it the rest of our lives, living only to die without ever realizing why. That is so tragic, but typical. All because, well, we'll wish to live intending only to die for it, why, to be as exiting itself right away left out as such. Yet that choice remains as intention to find ourselves still that free awareness as yet first and forever a person unborn now, not existing, only to pass away. You see, that is the catch, caught captive in our own intention, intentionally disregarding it as being first a person unborn, as wow, as existential, in order to experience it for ourselves as being tween a twin or an indivisible individual subject, only objectified a while as thought felt subjected between pain and pleasure, life or death, appearing or disappearing, as if sealed under the or why seal. So what you, as you are all along, are saying is to be careful what you wish, to live intentionally for you may get it, or not. Get it now? You see the problem as a child turning to adults for answers, parents, teachers, authority figures, who by then themselves already completely captivated and deeply invested in their own death wish, their own need to intend only want to die by knowing or denying immortality for themselves. As a result, they must fail to find themselves merely seeing as being beaming that point of you merely appearing it. Why, rather, instead of passing on and on their own pension, to be enchanted into appearing out of it, why is being subjected to their own intentions to be willing to now know a denial of themselves is only objectively speaking. Thus, the status quid pro quo is substituting its existentially objectivity for the still subjective subjectivity that I am first a person only potentially objectified now by all knowing out of it. Why not for a while to get it on and on as sexual? By now, sweat freely poured down the sides of my cheek as tears from my eyes. Gazing at me, Dell started crying as well, such that a steward came over to ask if we okay. Overwhelmed by the sheer joy released by the transducer, I found myself breaking into laughter, causing the poor lass to walk off shaking her head, only to then start laughing as well. As by really laughing as off is realizing the sheer folly of existing. Y'all the while still, first to the last a person, now a person only as thought felt potentially existing, but in itself why freeness of ever actually existing, actually being in actuality a freedom of that I am only now captive by our own intention to be willing of itself, to be aware and awareness not of it free, but only itself existing in captivity of objectivity. Why objectivity? Freed freedom of it all along. Why we may at any time now as being that I am aware of that awareness transcend, overpass, or exceed the death wish to live, intending only to die. For sorrow of it is being alone, only knowing, projecting by popular polarity, ascendings out of an errant, arrogant ignorance of itself. A sorrow being now, as thought, felt, born to live, a life, intending only to die. A death, lived with intention, as though, as thought born for it, born to death, to come in of itself any life, at most, or at least, only to whomever who knows, knowing out of it after a while now, after a short while now at that.